Hello everybody, I'd like to welcome you to our presentation. I am Anthony Hull and my partner is Yamato Kashima. We did our National Historic Site project on Fort Point National Historic Site in San Francisco, California. So to begin, where is Fort Point located? So Fort Point is located on the Presidio area of San Francisco. Presidio means fortress in Spanish. And it's at the base of the south tower of the Golden Gate Bridge. All right, so a little bit of history about Fort Point. The entrance to San Francisco Bay has always and long been a site for human habitation, starting with the Ohlone and the Miwok peoples. And there is evidence of a 4,000-year-old settlement there in the San Francisco Bay area. And in 1776, Spain established the first European settlement, and then Spain fortified the entrance cliff with a fortress. So even back then, Spain knew that this area was needing protection, and the name of that Spanish fortified area was called the Castillo de San Joaquin. It was built in 1794. It housed up to 13 cannons, and it was used until 1821 when Mexico gained independence from Spain. Now, in the transition from Mexico to the United States, in 1846, the Mexican-American War, American forces landed in Yerba Buena, which is now San Francisco, and the Spanish fort was actually repaired and occupied by American troops. Now, in 1848, there was a treaty which transferred California to the United States. And also in 1848, the gold rush of San Francisco happened. And so San Francisco grew in size, it exploded in size, and it became a very important area, which prompted the need for a military fort for protection. And this is where Fort Point came into play. So they demolished the old Spanish fort, and they built Fort Point. So from 1853 to 1861, with a crew of about 200, mostly retired miners, they picked a site that would have been the best for the protection of the maximum harbor area. And what they did is they made the lowest artillery tier as close to the water as possible. And the reason for that is so that cannonballs could be fired and they could ricochet across the water surface and hit any enemy ships that were attacking them. I thought that was very interesting. And so what they had to do was there was a 90-foot cliff. They had to blast that away down to 15 feet above sea level so that they could make those cannonballs ricochet on the water. All right, now as far as importance for Fort Point, it was actually known as the Pride of the Pacific. There were no other fortresses like it on the Pacific coast. It was revered for its strength and beauty, and it was actually one of the U.S. Army's most sophisticated coastal fortifications. It was an excellent example of third system construction. It was built in 3 tiers of casemates, which are vaulted rooms. It had 7-foot thick walls, and it was covered with sod to absorb any incoming cannon fire. It was built from over 8 million bricks, and these bricks were made in a brickyard that was not too far from Fort Point. Now, in the 1880s, they had a large-scale tree planting, and the reason for this tree planting is there were some pretty mean crosswinds in that area. And with all the trees they planted, it slowed those winds down and made it more tolerable. They also had a post-beautification program, and in the 1890s, the Presidio area was no longer a frontier outpost. It wasn't just some hick area there in San Francisco. It was a major military installation, and it was a base for American expansion into the Pacific. So it was quite the place to be. Now, Fort Point was also used for aid in times of need. Thousands of troops camped in tent cities. You can see the picture up there on the right-hand side. They were awaiting shipment to the Philippines, along with 4 African-American regiments called Buffalo Soldiers. That was kind of an interesting thing to us. Now, also returning sick and wounded soldiers were treated at Fort Point, It was actually the Army's first permanent general hospital. And in 1906 San Francisco earthquake and fire, the U.S. Army was able to provide food, clothing, shelter, and protection at Fort Point for the residents of San Francisco. Now, as far as economic impact, San Francisco Harbor was the busiest port along the West Coast. It was busy importing and exporting. The region had large mercury reserves, which were mined and exported throughout the U.S. and all over the world. And then silver from Utah was actually shipped by train to San Francisco and shipped to the eastern U.S. to fill the silver treasury reserves. That was a very interesting point that we found that was explained to us by the park ranger, Matthew Britton. Now also the California Gold Rush. In 1849 there was over $10 million in gold, which is $225 million now. 1850, $41 million, which is $971 million now. 1851 and 1852 respectively, $75 million and $81 million, which is $1.5 and $1.7 billion now. So all of this gold was mined and then shipped to the eastern U.S. to fill the gold treasury reserves. And the ships carrying this gold, as well as the areas where the gold was mined from, they needed protection. And so Fort Point offered this protection. All right, now as far as some interesting facts, the Confederate raider CSS Shenandoah actually planned to attack San Francisco. It came from the eastern United States, and it was going to try and attack San Francisco Harbor. But en route, the war ended, and so the captain found out about this and so decided to turn around and go back home. The fort was damaged in the earthquake of 1906, but not so much that it could not operate. And also in the early 1930s, the building was almost torn down. Fort Point was almost torn down to make way for the Golden Gate Bridge. But after the engineers got together and they took a look and reviewed the structure, they really deemed it as a high-value historical site, thought it was a great building, and thought that it was a travesty to tear it down. So the engineers all got together, went back to the planning table, and they found a way to build around it. And in some of the pictures you can see they just built right over the top of it. And then on October 16, 1970, President Nixon signed a bill making it a National Historic Site. And one last final thought I thought was really neat. Oh, we got to go back. There we go. So one last final thought. This is from Matthew Britton. He was the U.S. Park Ranger that we interviewed. He said, something to think about is Fort Point was built for protection and to keep people out. It is now a place that welcomes the world. And I thought that was something that we could really put in this presentation, that it really does give you something to think about. And Fort Point, I didn't even know it was there. I think my partner didn't either. It's just something that we learned about as we were putting this project together. We've learned quite a bit, and it's been very interesting. And we hope that all of you have enjoyed this presentation as well. And these are our sources. And we appreciate you taking the time to watch this presentation, and we hope you have a great day.